All right, we are live. So, what's up, you guys? Matt Mormann here with the ADP Average Dudes podcast, and I'm going to relay out my frame here. I didn't like the way that one looks. We're gonna make me big. There we go. So, this is very simple. I'm just gonna go through how I kind of make my projections. It's a project I'm working on right now. Videos are gonna start rolling out here in the upcoming week, where I'm gonna go through every single team, every single fantasy relevant player and just kind of how I go about making those stats. And obviously, projections are very important for fantasy football. They're something that really can help define rankings. Don't totally say to them though, because there is things like upside, injury risk, age risk, things like that are kind of hard to bake into projections, as well as kind of workload split is a really hard thing to always kind of get right, and things like what happens if a starting running back goes down. It's really hard to project that backup running back to be really, really good, even though we think he would be. So those are the kind of biggest hurdles of creating projections. But I just kind of wanted to hop on here and go through my process. This is kind of the first year I've really gone deep into making projections, so definitely a bit of a work in progress. But this is what I'm working with. So this is just my template page. And the yellow boxes you see throughout here, those are where I have to go input numbers. And those numbers are going to create what's in the white boxes, which ultimately create the green boxes, which are what are their final counting stats, right? So let's start up here in the across the very top here. I simply have team data, things like the team totals, the per game data as well. It goes into that. Those are their projection totals. So I've got formulas built in there that are pulling those numbers from the team, from the individual players, right? So let's go here to Arizona. So, for example, up here where I have the what's a good one here? So passing touchdowns, well, that's obviously just going to be Kyler Murray, but the rushing touchdowns, that is Kyler Murray, that's Trey Benson, that's James Conner, and then that's whatever peanuts I gave also to guys like DeMercado and Carter and DJ Dallas. And so that's how you kind of get those team totals. That's just kind of pulling together all of those. That's across the very top of the page. I would say I look at a few things to really make these. One of the biggest things I look at is historical data. The best things that we have for these players is what they've done already. And that's also how I can get the most objective data, is by looking at what has already happened. But that's also where science meets art a little bit, right? I have to look at a guy like James Conner and look at what he's done in the last 3 years. I use a lot of 3-year averages, and then I kind of weigh what years look most normal or predictable or repeatable. But 3 years is kind of the time frame I look at. So for a guy like James Conner, where he's kind of getting up there in age, and he used to be kind of the only show in town, and now he's got Trey Benson, I'd factor that in, and that's where I have to use my own judgment a little bit to kind of wiggle that number a little bit. I end up with like 11.75 yards per attempt with him. Whenever I do my running backs for Arizona video, I'll go into a bit more on how exactly I came up with that specific number for James Conner. Just know there's math behind it, though. It's looking at a lot of historical data and team data as well, right? So up here, you can see I have the 2023 rather, rush pass split for percentages. Last year they didn't have Kyler Murray for most of the year, so I think this year there's going to be a bit of a bump up in those pass attempts. So the pass percentage ended up being up to 54%. Is kind of the total. And I don't know why that shouldn't be in yellow, because I did not input that number. That's got a formula to it. So we're actually going to correct that. There we go. So like I said, some of these numbers I put in input myself. I use my best judgment, though. I try not to let my own bias get in the way too much. But again, I have to kind of incorporate what I know as a fantasy football player over the last few years of kind of coming up with these numbers. It's a lot of crunchy numbers. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of effort to put these together. So I really hope these are going to be useful for you whenever we get to the final season, or when we get to draft season. It's going to take me about 2 months, I think, to get through every team. Right now I'm working on Buffalo. Right now I'm 4 teams deep, which is a good start. I'm happy with the start I've made in the last week or so. But to come up with targets are incredibly important, obviously. And to come up with those numbers, I use target share. So that's the percentage of team targets. So I looked at the team's positional targets from a year ago. So that's your 2023 percentages over here. So for Arizona, it's 15% for running backs, 51% wide receiver, 33% tight end. That's their 2023 data. Obviously, things have changed though, right? Baltimore actually is a really good example of that, where Baltimore last season, very heavily wide receiver targeted. 23% of their targets went to tight ends last year. Mark Andrews was hurt. And so for this, I actually looked at 2022 target percentage a lot to kind of weigh into that data, which then helped me then create a Mark Andrews target share that was actually higher than all tight ends for the Ravens were in 2023. Isaiah Likely also right there at the 8.75. So like he still gets a nice little chunk of the target share, but obviously it's a much higher spike than it was in 2023. For 2024, I have them going with a 34% target share to tight ends. But again, that's not me just saying I think Mark Andrews gets a lot of targets. That's me looking at historical data and combining that with the most recent year, which was kind of an outlier because Andrews got hurt. And it does also kind of tell you, though, that, hey, if Andrews goes down again, these wide receivers see a lot more targets, right? Last year, they had 60% of their targets going to wide receivers there in Baltimore. This year, I've only got them at 49%. I've got a couple notes here on the side, too, to kind of help me guide it. Like you see there, Odell Beckham last year was a 16.49% on his target share. So that's just kind of notes to help me remember things, notes to help me guide what I need to be doing as far as those inputs go. So for the wide receivers, I start with target share, come up with that. Then I go to their yards per reception. I basically just go down the line here. And so yards per reception, that's another one where I still get historical data. For a rookie like Zay Flowers here in the top Ravens line, last year's number, I believe for him, I think it was like 11.5, I think. And so I just bumped it up a little bit. Rookie going into year 2, had a really good rookie year. Okay. I feel okay about bumping it up a little bit, not too much. I'm not gonna go crazy. It's hard to always project a breakout. That's something projections don't usually find, but it can give you good baseline numbers on everybody. And so, like for him, I bumped that up a little bit. For right here below him, that's Rashad Bateman. He's always been a deep target guy, and so therefore his catch percentage, as you see here, pretty low, but Zay Flowers is pretty high, and that's another one with Zay where I think it was like a 69% last year. I bumped up 2%. Touchdown rate, that's one where for those, I largely am just going to be pulling from either career totals or 3-year averages. That's not a whole lot of my opinion going into those. That's basically, what percentage of your receptions have been caught for touchdowns. And that's pretty much just how I find that number. And that's just going to be going into that, and that's going to come up with your touchdowns, right? So your target percentage, I have that linked to your team pass attempts. So that's going to spit out your targets per game, your total targets. Your catch percentage is linked to those targets, and that's how we then come up with how many catches you have. I then have that linked with your yards per reception. That's going to come up with your receiving yardage. Those also linked to your receiving touchdown percentage, linked up with your receptions. That's how we get the total receiving touchdowns. Wide receivers, I have a few rush attempts here for Zay Flowers. I'm going to put some for Deebo Samuel. It's going to be an exception more than a rule for me to be getting any receivers rush attempts. It's going to be guys who have had pretty significant roles on that in the past. I'm not going to give a ton of those out. What else do we need to go over here? Yeah, rush attempts. It's kind of the same deal. Same deal as the wide receivers. And actually, I have not finished my Ravens ones here. As you can see, the rushing touchdown percentages are empty. So I need to figure those out still and input those. But it's same deal. So, rushing yards same way, or receiving yards rather, same exact way. Rush attempts, I look at last year's data. I look at 3-year averages, kind of put that together. Also, I'm going to look a little bit at the team history, right? So a team who has historically split work a lot or given a lot of work to one player or another, that's going to be a factor in there as well. So for the Ravens here, Derrick Henry, pretty justifiable to give Derrick Henry a very large workload compared to the rest of his teammates. A player like Keaton Mitchell coming off injury, the way I've decided to approach this is basically come up with, I think, the total average will be over the course of the season. So like him, it ends up being a 4.5 for rush attempts per game. I think early on it's beneath that. I think later on it's above that, but I think that's where we get to. Maybe I bump it up to closer to 5, maybe even a little bit above that, but that's where I kind of landed on with Keaton. Rush yards per carry, that's again just like receiving yardage. Pretty much just looking at that historical data, and that spits that out. So the rush attempts per game, that comes up with your rush attempts, and then your rush attempts combined with your yards per carry, that's how we're gonna get your rushing yardage. And then your rush touchdown percentage combined with your rush attempts, that's how we're going to get your rushing touchdowns. It's very simple stuff, really, as far as how these formulas work. It's just a lot of kind of deciding on these yellow squares. You look at the historical data and you come up with what you think best fits in those. Let's go up here to quarterbacks. Let's go to Lamar. So, again, your completion percentage, we're looking at the history. Lamar had a much higher completion percentage last year than he has in his career, but it was a new offensive coordinator. No real weapons of loss. I mean, Odell, but I'm not that bothered by losing Odell Beckham. So I decided to keep his completion percentage pretty high up there. Based on last year's data, pass attempts are pretty close to last year. Again, a change in offensive coordinator, that weighs a lot to me. And second year in that offense, I think that means more of last year's trends are more viable than what happened 2 years ago. Yards per attempt, again, I think I weighed that a little bit closer to last season, but didn't go crazy with it though. Kind of held it strong with what's been in the past. Same with the touchdown percent, interception percent, which again, those are just percentage of passes that go for touchdowns, percentage of passes that go for interceptions. QB rush per game, again, I find all that just based on past data and plug those numbers in, So it's a little bit of judgment calls there with a couple of those, but it's really is. It's kind of just taking last year's numbers, adjusting a bit this direction or that direction, kind of what way you think the offense is going to go. And that will be kind of how you come up with those numbers. And I've got just a couple of checks and balances for myself here, right? Like I have my total percentage, make sure that it equals 1, so that way make sure those numbers are correct. But that is basically my spreadsheet. Now I have here the differences between last year and this year. We're going to get off the Ravens because obviously I haven't finished the rushing touchdowns, so that one's inaccurate. But let's go to Atlanta. So I have Atlanta. Hey, huge spike, 13 more touchdowns on the season than they scored a year ago. Obviously, Kirk Cousins is a huge factor in that. What was that, 400 more yards total on the season from last season's total, passing wise. I do have them losing some rushing though, a little bit less rushing work. I have the receptions in here again also, just to kind of keep myself balanced. I will say you'll notice like here, my rushing yardage or my receiving yardage and my passing yardage do not equal. I want to make sure they are within like a feasible range, you see here my team totals, like it's 39-71 to 40-46. That's a 70 yardage difference. I'm cool with having that margin of error. That's a big play, right, of a difference. So I'm cool with having that much error. I don't want to have much, right? I don't have 400 yards different between my receivers and my quarterbacks. So when I start this, I actually do my quarterbacks first. And quarterbacks kind of give me a baseline of what I think the offense is going to look like. I kind of make my receiving yardage fit to that. I do make sure the targets and the attempts do match up. Again, at least as closely as possible. The receptions and completions, yeah, that one's about 80 different. I don't love having it be that different. Maybe I should bump up those percentages a little bit on catch percentage. That'd be where I'd get that from. Touchdowns, yeah, again, it's not going to be a perfect science, but I think that it shows you where you can have some opportunities at, right? So for Atlanta, for example, and this is something I'm going to break down when I go into the Falcons pass catcher video, is for the Falcons, it's easy to project a pretty good touchdown percentage for Kirk Cousins. He's always kind of had a good one. And so therefore your Kirk Cousins touchdowns will be pretty high. However, Drake London and Kyle Pitts, these are both guys who have had god-awful touchdown percentages receiving in their career. So it's really hard for me to just project an 8%, a spike. I mean, how many touchdowns did I give Drake London? I gave Drake London 4.5 touchdowns. I'm pretty sure he has 6 through 2 seasons, I think. It might be 5, actually. It might be 5. So if you've got 5 career touchdowns, it's really hard for me to give you 5 touchdowns in one season then. So that's kind of where it becomes a bit tough. But you can look at that receiving touchdown number being low and the passing touchdown number being high. And that's where you can find yourself in a breakout situation, right? As you say, well, if this number receiving touchdowns goes up, someone's catching them. I think it's Drake London. So you can then apply that. And that's how Drake London ends up being a little bit higher in your rankings. Because you think he's breakout. You think he's making up that 6 touchdown gap between him and Kirk Cousins. There's opportunity there, right? So it's not a mistake in my projections that I have a 6 touchdown difference. It's an opportunity that exists for somebody in this offense to catch a few more touchdowns. And on the opposite end too, if I end up in a team situation like I think Buffalo, well, no, not Buffalo. Who's a team where the quarterback touchdowns are probably going to be lower than the receiving touchdowns? I don't know. Let's go Vegas because you have Devontae Adams there. You've got an exciting Brock Bowers there, Jacoby Myers, but then you have Gardner Minshew, right? So you may find yourself in a situation where it's like, hey, buyer beware. My receiving touchdowns are higher than my quarterback touchdowns. I think I'm going to buy into the quarterback numbers a bit more than those individual receivers necessarily. So it'll be a bit of a case by case. But that is kind of a brief overview as to how I make my rankings, or my projections rather. Rankings are then kind of based off of this a little bit. But that is the general ins and outs of how it works. Again, I'm making videos over the course of the next 2 months, going team by team, player by player, breaking down all of these guys who are relevant. So be sure to keep up here with the ADP on YouTube and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button for me. It helps out the channel quite a bit when you do. And go check out some of the other videos we've got on the channel right now. We've got a ton of rookie coverage still during your rookie seasons. Go check those out. And then, hey, if the first round of projections is up, go check those out. See what the total full results of this process was. I'll start things out with Arizona and then Atlanta. I'm going to just go alphabetical by city here. So we are going to have some fun with these projections over the next couple months.